This episode of the Fine Homebuilding podcast is brought to you by Loctite Tight Foam. Say no to inefficient and drafty. Say yes to Loctite Tight Foam. When pros need to seal gaps too small for insulation but big enough to create a draft, they reach for Loctite's Tight Foam. The high-density foam forms a tenacious bond to most common building materials, stays flexible to prevent cracking, and keeps air, moisture, and pests out of the house. Whether you're adding R value to the rec room or finishing a boring basement, give that space a second chance with Loctite Tight Foam. Visit LoctiteProducts.com for more information. Hey, podcast listeners, be sure to check out Fine Homebuilding's e-learning opportunities. We've created a special discount coupon just for you. Learn about sustainable home building, using mini-split heat pumps, insulation, finished carpentry, and more. See all of what's available at courses.finehomebuilding.com and then use the special code podcast20 for a discount on any class. That's podcast20 in all caps. Thanks for listening. Where do you buy this, Mike? I don't know that I've ever seen this product for sale.
So what I do is I drive out west of the Rocky Mountains where it's commonly stocked, and I fill up my pickup truck, and then I come east. You're right.
It sounds like Smokey and the Bandit. Welcome to the Fine Home Building Podcast, our weekly discussion of building, remodeling, and design topics aimed at anybody who cares deeply about the craft and science of working on houses. I'm Senior Editor Patrick McComb. Today I'm joined by Fine Home Building Editorial Advisor Mike Girton.
Hello.
Fine Home Building Senior Editor Brian Pontalillo.
Hey, everyone.
And our producer Jeff Rose.
Hi there.
Please email your questions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. You can find previous podcasts and check out the show notes at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. Gents, thanks for being here today. Good to have you.
Yeah.
Good to be here.
You know, Mike, one of the delights of our regular correspondence in recent years is I get to keep abreast of all your projects. And I learned yesterday that in addition to your chops as a carpenter, a roofer, a siding, a building science expert, you're also a body man. You fix your own vehicles with innovative methods. You want to talk a little bit about that?
Well, I'm not much of an auto body person anymore. I did in college when I had use of my father's shop, but that's pretty much gone now. But I kind of use my carpentry skills in to solve metalworking problems, whether it's on my own pickup truck to hold pieces of the body like the fender or the mud flap on. I just pull out some Tech screws or some leftover backer board screws and drive those right into my fenders. It's a beater truck, kind of. I think you might have one of those as well, or had one. And anything to just keep it going. And my big project yesterday was on my backhoe, the battery, which is like 12 years old, was getting weak. So I figured before winter I'd get a new battery. So I pulled the old one out, and the battery platform, the little metal tray that it sits in, was pretty much gone. And the battery was kind of slung over part of the frame of the backhoe. So I was afraid that one more bounce with the, going down a road or one through the woods would leave the battery sitting underneath the rear axle instead of on the tray. So I
welded to the frame, which would have been kind of exciting.
Arc welded itself. So I built a new battery box out of wood, using some pressure treated wood. And I think it's actually better than the original metal pan because the rear wheel is adjacent to where the battery tray was, and there was an opening of about 6 inches where mud would get slung onto the battery box or the battery tray, which is, I think, why it eventually rusted away, in addition to the leaking acid out of the battery. So now so part of the modification of this new battery box made out of pressure-treated wood is a deflector there. I put an upright piece about 9 inches tall, which I could fit in there, so any mud would be deflected back into the wheel well area.
Well, it was an elegant repair, and I commend you. The thing I observe all the time are carpenters and I'm guessing siding contractors who have fixed their broken glass and bodywork with zip tape. See that a lot. I bet you guys do too. Yeah.
Oh,
It
yeah.
seems to hold up very well in that application, I must say.
I think anybody in the construction business, they solve problems outside of their usual scope of work using the tools and materials that they're familiar with working on. So, I always think of the pickup truck bed that rusts out, and then a week later you see the same guy driving down the road with the same pickup, but it has a
A
pressure
deck
treated
on the
wood
back.
jack and
Yeah.
sidebars on it. Yeah.
Brian, have you fixed your vehicles with any carpentry techniques in the past?
I think I've shared this before, but I just stay away from fixing vehicles. It's never been my strength. And usually when I try, I just end up I usually just end up getting myself into trouble. So I stay away from fixing vehicles. That said, I drive a 98 Ford Ranger right now. And even though this 98 Ford Ranger has exceptionally low miles, I do expect that, I know that there's some rust happening, and I do expect it to need some work, in the coming years. So maybe it's a new hobby for me.
Spray foam.
I think it needs.
foam.
I think it needs flames painted on it. Totally. How about you, Jeff? Have you fixed cars with tech screws in the past?
I'm sure I've done some stuff like that, but I know my first car had, some aluminum flashing with pop rivets and.
Well, I was taking advantage of the warm, unusual fall weather this past weekend to do some painting. I had a can of exterior paint, and paint used to cost like $30, $40 a gallon, or even less. Now paint costs $75 or $80 a gallon. So I was determined to use this stuff up before it went bad. As you guys were talking about a couple weeks ago, the can started rusting, and it's not long before that stuff is totally unusable. So I decided to paint the big doors on the front of the barn and the lean-to doors and the basement bulkhead door. And although it was in the 60s the day I painted, it got really cool overnight, like down into the mid 30s. And that was not predicted. It was supposed to be into the mid 40s, which in painting, that's a big difference. And I found out what happens when you paint when the temperature is not warm enough. And when the dew hit it in the morning, it washed some of the paint off. So that was a little disappointing.
Patrick, there's another thing that can happen too when you have those falling temperatures after you paint. I ran into this when I painted the FHB house Pro Home back in 2016, and we were painting in December. And the paint I was using, I think it was a Sherwin-Williams paint, and it was good to 35 degrees. But just like you had the experience where the temperature dropped below freezing or near freezing, in my case, it dropped below freezing. The paint hadn't completely cured, and when I got there the next day, it was dry. However, it had this fantastic, what looked like, when ice first forms on a thin surface and you get that crystals going all over the place. So it had this crystal pattern across all of the trim boards, which until I painted over it looked pretty good. It was like if I could have recreated it, for a art project, I think I would have been at one of the top entrants in an art competition with that.
So
I think,
the barn doors face like northwest, and there's a hillside behind them, so they're not exposed to the night sky. They did way better than the bulkhead door, which aims up to the 0 degrees Kelvin of the deep space. So
I think modern, new paints have gotten so good, right? And they're so forgiving, and you can recoat quicker than you do second coats quicker than you could in the past. And, but these weather conditions really do have a big impact. I had an experience, only experience I've ever had with paint failing was an interior painting. job where I think what happened was it was very humid. It was summertime, super humid in the house at the time, and I think I recoated. I put a first coat on the walls, and I think, paint cures slower when humidity levels are high. And I think even though I was within sort of the manufacturer's guidelines, I think I recoated too quickly for those conditions. And that first coat of paint never adhered properly. And the paint, I could literally, kind of reach, grab a little bit of the paint and peel it right off the wall, clean.
Oh.
A clean sheet of, peel a sheet of plastic essentially right off the wall, which made it easy to fix the problem there. But yeah,
Self-peeling paint.
I used the same paint in better weather conditions and didn't have a problem. But yeah, the weather conditions really, don't mess around with weather conditions when you're painting unless you want to have a problem.
Yeah, and I knew better. I really did. I was like, this is definitely pushing it. It's a beautiful day. Who cares, right? It's going to be fine. And, it doesn't look terrible, but it could have looked a lot better if I'd have just done it a few weeks ago.
Mm-hmm.
Jeff, have you had any problems with painting recently or other home repairs?
No, but I did have an interesting thing with paint because I had, some old cans of paint that I was just, had a little bit in and letting them dry out so I could throw them away. And one of them was one of the newer plastic buckets. And I was able to lift the whole chunk of paint. It was like half an inch thick. It was kind of, it was fun.
Are you guys straining your paint before you use it? It's something I started doing recently with older paint, not even super old, just if it's been sitting for a little bit. It just going to the hardware store and buying these strainers that are made for paint, and that you can get them to size to fit on a 5-gallon bucket or a paint can, and then just always having an extra bucket and just before I use it, just pouring the whole whatever's left in the gallon or whatever's left in the 5-gallon pail just into a new one through the strainer. And it's so nice to just get anything out of the paint right from the start. I didn't know. It's one of those sort of forehead slappers, but I didn't know that was a product. Those paint strainers until I saw it on the shelf one day, and I just thought, I'm grabbing a couple packs of these. I think they're like 99 cents or $1.99 or something, and just put them with my paint supplies. And now I always use them.
I got to try that because I'm still using nylon stockings left over from my mother's from years ago.
Yeah, well, it's
the
just
good thing about those, Mike, is you can kind of squeeze the paint through it to speed it up.
That's true. So you've done it.
It's one of the more infuriating parts of using old paint, right? Is that you often are you're looking at your work and you're seeing little
chunks,
grabbing them out with your finger, and then you have to smooth the paint out, and yeah.
I think every one of my pairs of pants has those little chunks of paint smeared on the butt from picking them out of the paint film. Hey, I wanted to remind everyone about Ian's company, TDS Custom Construction in Madison, that they're having an open house on December 3rd. So that's coming right up. You'll want to go there. If you want more information, email the podcast email box, and I'll forward those on to Ian so he can expect you and get sufficient snacks for your benefit.
Yeah, and if you can't make it to Wisconsin, I'm really hoping that we're going to get this project in the magazine. It's just such a great practical house.
Well, tell me about it. I don't know as much as you do, I'm sure.
Well, I've looked over the plans now quite a bit, and I had an interview with the architect at his company. I want to say her name's Christy. I hope I'm getting that right.
I believe that's correct. Yes.
Yeah, and she's just excellent. She's a wealth of knowledge. She's designed all sorts of a range of different types of buildings and projects, including high performance homes. And this is really, it's in some ways it's very much a neighborhood house. It fits into a neighborhood with a garage and a front door that just kind of face the street and some nice landscaping and a simple driveway. But there were some site challenges. I think there's some wetlands, and it's a corner lot, and the buildable shape, the buildable space on the property had an odd shape to it. So they kind of had to turn the house on a bit of an angle, and they found some ways to kind of make that aesthetically appealing. And then inside it's essentially it's it's 2 stories, but it's essentially designed for single story living for people who would like to have single story living, with sort of an open floor plan on one part of the house, and then bedrooms and bathrooms and closets and whatnot on the other side of the house. And they did a nice thing where the entire wall that they separated the public and the private areas with is sort of a feature wall. It's got cabinetry and built-ins and the space for the TV, and so it's not going to look at all like a wall. It's going to look like it's going to look very purposeful. And then finally, just really sensible deep building construction details that solve for a lot of problems, from the performance goals, double stud walls and thermally broken slab and things like this. And then also, even on one elevation of the house, lowering the floor joists below the top of the foundation wall so that they have a seamless entry into the house, step-free entry into the house. So just lots of great details, lots of great solutions for pleasing design and high performance building.
It's coming right up. So if any of that stuff interests you, I would say go check it out. And Ian, his company, has been very generous in opening the doors of their projects to just folks who are interested, which I think is pretty awesome.
Yeah, for sure.
Oh, as always, we heard from our listeners, and the episode 603 on protecting buried posts generated some feedback on YouTube. Ryan wrote, someone makes a heat shrink tube to cover the area where fence posts exit the ground. I think they're like 8 inches tall and come in different diameters. So you guys familiar with this product? I believe he's talking about the post saver. Am I right, Mike? Is that what you think he's talking about?
I haven't heard of Post Saver, but it makes sense, because if you can get anything to shrink around or to bond tightly to the post in that first, 8 inches to a foot below grade, that's the active area biologically in most soils. So that's where the rot's going to be most likely to occur.
And if you look at a rotted fence post, it's always like a little cone at the soil level, right? It's, yeah. I'll put a link on the podcast page to postsaver.com, and it is exactly what Ryan describes. It's a heat shrink tube for your PT post, and I have never used it, but it seems like a good idea. Ronnie suggested good glue, and that makes some sense, right? If you can treat the end grain and prevent water from wicking up into the post, it's probably helpful compared to not doing that. Do you treat the end grain of your post, Mike?
I use copper naphthenate, so it doesn't seal the ends, but it's a wood preservative, and it will soak into the end grain really deeply. And it's what we use, or required to use, whenever we make field cuts in any pressure treated lumber, even if you're building above grade. But I've used it on cedar posts, white cedar, red cedar, as well as pressure treated posts when I put them in the ground.
Where do you buy this, Mike? I don't think I've ever seen this product for sale.
So what I do is I drive out west of the Rocky Mountains, where it's commonly stocked, and I fill up my pickup truck, and then I come east. You're right. It
sounds like Smokey and the Bandit, Mike. You're
yeah.
westbound or southbound and down, whatever.
It's one of those products. It's required by the building code, yet most lumber yards, even professional lumber yards, don't stock it. I buy it mail order at either a big box store, online store, when they have it in stock, or from Amazon. That's where I got my last gallon, was from Amazon. And it comes in, 3 or 4 days. And I'm surprised. I would not want to be the carrier of these liquid products that could easily get damaged in a box. And it's nasty when it leaks out. It stinks. It gets on everything, but
that would really be a drag in the UPS or Amazon truck, am I right?
Yeah, I'm surprised they even sell it online, but that's the only way I can get it.
Brian, have you ever seen this product out there in the world? We've been writing about this for 20 years, and I've never seen it.
Other than Mike, I've never seen anyone really using this. And I actually had an experience, and fortunately, it was a sort of low risk project. But I had an experience where I cut some timbers, 6x6 pressure treated timbers for. It wasn't really a retaining wall. It was just sort of holding some gravel in place for a driveway. So it was two courses of timbers, and the field cuts rotted in short time too, in a matter of a few years. And I had to replace those timbers. So I think it's a pretty good idea.
Andy Engel had the same can, I swear, for 2 decades. Keegan writes in episode 600, a listener wrote in about his overly complex HVAC system at his new house in Minnesota. I have a few thoughts about simplifying the system. I chose to use a Space Pack 3-ton outdoor air-to-water heat pump to handle all of my heating and cooling loads in one unit. This was a very nerve-wracking decision, as I feel this is a pretty new technology to the market. I was lucky to have an amazing hydronic contractor here in North Idaho that helped me with the installation. Here's a quick overview of my system. A Space Pack 3-ton outdoor unit, traditional barrier PEX hydronic slab heating and cooling in the basement, 3 head units upstairs that are serviced with hot water and cold water instead of refrigerant, and an offset 50-gallon NTI domestic hot water tank. The 3-ton unit cost about $12,000, and there were 3 mini heads, 2 at 6,000, 1 at 12,000 BTU, and the supplied tank. My house is about 2,700 square feet of condition, plus a 900 square foot garage with its own hydronic zone. In a nutshell, the house construction is double stud, dense packed cellulose with 12-inch walls, an R80 ceiling. My blower door came back at 0.57 ACH50, so the reason I was able to go with the smaller Space Pack unit was because the heating and cooling loads were so low for the square footage. My manual J heating load came back at 38,000 BTUs an hour. The installation cost was another $18,000, so all in, I get a warm slab, cool slab, heat and AC upstairs, and domestic hot water for about $30,000. And don't forget, it's all using a heat pump, so I'm 3 to 4 times more efficient compared to gas or electric. I'm in climate zone 6, but for those cold climate skeptics out there, the Space Pack tank includes resistance style elements for when the temperatures get too low. I believe it's around 5 degrees Fahrenheit that the system would start to use its resistance elements. I think this is cheap peace of mind and a great integration on Space Pack's part. As for ventilation, I installed a Zender Q350 to handle my ventilation needs. I know that these are often thought of as excessively expensive, but the installation is incredibly easy and at about 10 grand. I don't think it's actually exorbitantly more than a well-installed Panasonic or Honeywell or Fantech. The advantage is that it's smart, self-balancing system. Although I haven't run it long enough to know how amazing it actually is, the unit has boost switches in all the bathrooms, which double the airflow for a period of time. This, of course, not only eliminates the Panasonic bath fans, but also the need for makeup air for those fans. Again, reducing cost, penetrations, and complexity. This puts me in, all told, at $40,000 to heat, cool, shower in, and ventilate a 3,600 square foot space and incredibly low cost to operate. I hope it works out, and I'll report back in episode 700, let you all know how it's performing. Cheers, thank you for the podcast. I've listened to all 600. Well, that is a fantastic email, Keegan. Thank you very much. What do you guys think? You're speechless.
I know a little bit about the air-to-water heat pumps, but I don't know enough about them yet. It's a system I want to learn more about. I understand that the principle is that you've got one outdoor unit, which is a packaged unit, where all of your refrigerant is already built in the factory. So it's not like you have refrigerant lines going into the indoor units as we do with the mini split system. And then the only connection between the outdoor unit and the indoor units are hydronic pipes, basically pipes with water in them that are insulated. Mm-hmm. And then it can run either hot or cold water through those pipes. But what has always puzzled me is, like in September, for instance, I was running heat for 3 days, and then I was running no air conditioning or heating for several days, but then I was running air conditioning. So if you've got this tank outside, which is going to store either that warm or the cold water that the heat pump is generating to service the indoor units, can you switch between heating and air conditioning on a short cycle like that, or is it like a commitment for a longer period of time? Oh, I'm going to be in heating mode from, October 1st through, say, April 30th, and then I put it into air conditioning mode where it's storing the cold water. So I'd like to hear somebody talk more about that. It might be good for having a guest on who can explain all this.
Maybe Keegan will answer, but although he's living in climate zone 6, which I'm guessing when you commit to heating, you're committing to heating. There's not much going back and forth between the two system functions. Space Pack is the company I recall made small diameter air conditioning systems. Am I right, Mike?
High velocity retrofit systems, yeah, where you could fit them into really cramped spaces with small 2-inch ducts, many of them flexible, and then you had all of these high velocity ports that discharged the air into the house.
You had one of these systems, if I recall.
I have a competing product called I'm drawing a blank on the name, but there's energy saving products out of Canada. There were 3 companies, Unico, Space Pack, and the energy saving products that all made these high velocity systems, which can create some drafts inside of the house and so on. But I think the system that Keegan's talking about sounds very different than those original Space Pack high velocity systems.
Keegan, thanks for the email. Thanks for the kind words. Think about all you could have done with the 600 hours of podcast listening. I'll just leave that.
I would like to hear more about the Zender units, Zender ERVs in comparison to other models. I'm not. I may be wrong, especially if he did a lot of research on this, but I think what I've heard is that the price difference between the Zender units and comparable other ERVs is there's a wild swing
3 times in price. I've heard on generally speaking.
Yes, and yet people and with all the same features, but I hear over and over and over again from builders about how nice it is to install the Zender units. So I'm curious how much that's worth. If they actually, once in operation, if there are advantages, if there are actually better products once in operation, and I'm just I'm really curious about that. And if they're not just if some part of it is not just maybe that they're a shiny object, they get a lot of attention in the home building world and they look cool.
I think the small ducts are a huge advantage. I mean, running big ductwork, 6-8-inch diameter duct is hard to hide that stuff. Whereas the Zenders have what, a 3-inch or 2.5-inch. I mean, that's a big plus. Mm-hmm. They fit in a normal stud cavity, for an interior wall, or whereas big duct's not going to go there.
I wonder if any builders have taken the Zender flex duct and run those to another brand of ERV or HRV. One of the things that the Zender has is a big sort of an accumulator box. It's a box rectangle that just sits nearby the actual heat exchanger, and then all of these little ducts plug into it, so you wouldn't need this transition. But I'm surprised nobody else has come out with this small diameter duct system for ventilation, because it's a no-brainer when you're trying to route it through stud walls and even ceiling joists or floor joists.
Yeah, for sure.
David posted on YouTube about our conversation about making homes more affordable, which we talked also about in episode 603. He says codes might be an issue. Fire, sound, air separation can be more expensive or take a lot more time in townhomes compared to single-family homes. Perkins Brothers just built a townhouse that required an air/fire/sound break from foundation to roof sheathing with no breaks in between the attached homes. I've seen these gypsum walls. They look like a pain, but it's got to be less money though to build adjacent structures, because you're talking about 2 less sets of walls at a minimum, right?
Think of the energy efficiency too. I mean, you don't have as much surface area to the exterior when you've got townhouse style buildings as you do with a single family detached. So they're bound to be more energy efficient, though it's not maybe a function of the affordability upfront cost, but over the lifespan of a building is probably going to use much less energy except if you're the end unit, of course, but otherwise you save on the energy side.
I look to the market to decide what's most affordable. And if you look at the least expensive new housing in the country, it's always, townhomes, 3, 4 units. And, in some places they still sell for mid 200s in my observation. But I don't see single family homes selling for similar prices anywhere. Question 1 comes from Micah. Hi, Mike. I'm a builder in Salida, Colorado. I have a quick question I was hoping you could help me with. I was wondering if you had any experience with self-adhered rolled roofing, Polyflex SA, P by Polyglass, and Henry 2-ply self-adhered rolled roofing are examples. I found them on the market, but I've never heard anything about them, good or bad. I have an upcoming project with a low slope roof and was wondering if there are alternatives to torch down roll roofing. Thanks for all you do. I listen to the FH podcast every week, and I always learn something new whenever you're on. Best, Micah. What do you think, Mike?
That was a nice note. Some listeners track me down through my website and email me questions, which are, in the case of Mike, is appropriate for the podcast because we don't get a lot of roofing questions. But I already answered him with an email. But the basics are on the alternatives. You can use there are several products. You can use EPDM, TPO, and PVC. Some of those would be glue down, like with the EPDM, and it kind of glues down like Formica does on a countertop. You put adhesive on the membrane, and then after you fold it back, you put it on the substrate, and then you flatten it out and roll it down. Some of them are mechanically attached. The Polyglass and the Henry are they're kind of like one step above roll roofing. They are a modified asphalt in that it will stick and adhere to itself. They're usually a 2-ply system where you put down a base sheet, which gets fastened mechanically down, and then you put the self-adhering cap sheet over the top of those. I've looked into them for many years. I've looked at them for projects. And I have not yet used either of them, just because I'm familiar with EPDM, so that's usually what I fall back on because I know how to work with it and all of the details. What I can recommend, though, is that I think both of those products, as well as other self-adhered roll roofing type of products, are utilized often in commercial constructions for low slope or flat roofs. They have a good performance history, from what I understand, talking to commercial roofers who use them. And if you're not familiar with the process of installing them, look to a supplier who's local to where you are, who does like warehouse or trainings at their facility. That's how I learned how to do my EPDM roofing. I went to a few trainings that were at the local roofing supplier. And they just have a little mock-up, and it has a bunch of details on it, the common details. And to see it installed is, if a picture's worth 1,000 words, having somebody demo it in front of you is worth 1,000,000 words. And you can ask questions. So if it's economical for you to use those products and they're supplied locally, then go and talk to the local rep and see what you can find out.
I've heard that the warranties on these self-adhered kind of products that are meant to do small jobs are less vigorous, shall we say, than commercial roofing systems that are tested and installed by trained roofers. Is that your perception too, Mike? You're nodding.
Yeah, I looked at the warranties over the years, and they run anywhere from 15 to 20 years usually. Unless you're a certified installer, and then you can get a little bump on that. But EPDM gives you the same. I only get a 20-year warranty on the EPDM I get, even though I know it's going to last maybe 30 or 40 or more years, depending on the situation. And that's really what is going to be the definer there, is what the situation is. I'm going to guess if you're in Colorado, you're probably going to get a lot more sun exposure. So that would be one consideration there as well. Unless you're going to be putting, it's a flat roof that you're putting a deck over, that sleeper deck might be shading the roofing, and then you might get 50, 60 or more years out of it just because it's not getting that UV degradation. So there's a lot of things involved in how long something's going to last on a roof.
I've heard generally from Diami, in cooling climates, you want light-colored membranes, right, because they're more reflective. In heating-dominated climates, you want a dark-colored roofing material for the opposite reason. You want to warm the roof. His preference is, like yours, EPDM, and they actually make white versions of the rubber material, but he feels the coating makes it less durable, and he feels because of that, I'm pretty sure that PVC is a better choice in cooling-dominated climates because it is white in color or light naturally and doesn't need that additional reflective layer. Although, as my recollection is, PVC needs to be heat welded, which is a whole other layer of complication for some ordinary person, right?
It's very easy. I was amazed. I did a training for one of the PVC membranes for decking. I think it was Duradeck. And it's just it's just a very specialized heat gun, just like a heat gun you use for curing things on a job site or warming things. The heat guns have a tip on them, and it uses, some of them use electricity, some use flame, but that tip gets hot. But at the right temperature so that you're warming or heating the PVC, and it's like fusion welding. Once you liquefy it or make it plastic, then you roll it together with a steel 2-inch roller and press really hard. Once you get that technique down, and I had it down in about 10 minutes, a very short learning curve, you can do long seams in PVC with two people without a problem. So it is doable.
Mike, I've had trouble ironing. This does not sound like the right process for me. I'm sorry.
Well, then maybe
it's not hard.
Maybe you shouldn't try.
What do you do about the fasteners, Mike?
The fasteners?
Yeah.
On a PVC roofing?
Yeah, how's that work?
The ones I've worked with, there are like these already welded on flanges they're like little flaps with grommet holes in them on the bottom side of the membrane. So you roll out like, say, 4 to 6 feet where your next nail line is. You nail it down, then you roll out the next 4 to 6 to 10 feet, whatever the frequency of those nail lines. So they're just little flaps that stick down out of the bottom of the sheet. And then, so that's how it's mechanically attached. There might be other systems. That was, like 30, 35 years ago that I was putting those down on a flat roof. So it's been a while, but they were quick, went down really quick. That was one nice thing. It was less mess than the glue with the EPDM, waiting for it to flash off before you roll it. And then you have to roll it all down. The mechanically attached PVC was pretty quick.
Increasingly we get questions about low slope roofs in the podcast and at Fine Homebuilding. And do you think it's more common on residential structures than it used to be? Maybe the products are more reliable. I don't know.
I think it's the design of the buildings.
Yeah.
When I look in some of the architectural magazines in the last few years, I'm seeing a lot more residents with like flat roofs, no overhangs. It's like this new aesthetic style that seems to permeate different parts of the country. And, those are all using a commercial, what we would think of as a commercial style roofing. I think it's time for Damiani to come on and answer all our questions about roofing.
Diami's been super helpful with podcast questions, and I'm sure there's tons more we could ask him. If y'all have questions about commercial roofing systems or roofing generally, we should have Diami on as a special guest, right? And tailor some that would be great, right?
Yeah, he's excellent. He's got well researched answers with great experience to speak from. So that would be a great episode if we could gather up our roofing questions. Yeah.
Yeah,
And so
totally.
send in those roofing questions and we'll get somebody who knows a lot more than we do.
This comes from Ethan, and you all are going to have to help me because some of these things I'm not even familiar with. He says, hello, podcast. I've successfully used BOPT in the past for HVAC system sizing, as well as to create ERI, energy reading index information for building permit submittals. As far as I know, the ERI functionality has been removed from BOPT 3.0, so now I have to learn to do energy calculations another way. I've used ResChecked and BOPT in the past. Is it worth it for me as an architect to learn how to run manual J calculations? I have played around with the passive house planning program at a design class, but feel like it's overkill for me in the design process and based upon my client's stomach for additional design fees. Now I'm looking at energy gauge, rem rate, ecotrope, summary. Is it BOPT, manual J, ResCheck? Oh my. Ethan, does anyone know what BOPT is? I mean, go ahead, Mike. Yeah.
So BOPT, I played around with it a few years under like generation 1 and 2. It's the Building Energy Optimization Tool. It's from the Department of Energy through the National Renewable Energy Lab, and it was essentially an energy modeling software that they kept upgrading. I haven't looked at it in a while, so this was news to me that the 3.0 doesn't have the same functionality. It goes beyond just, I think the manual J portion is kind of built into, as I remember, the BOPT software. But you got a lot more energy performance information out of it. But there are, and I haven't looked around in a while, there are some, beyond getting into the real hardcore manual J software modeling tools, online software tools, or downloaded software tools. There are just some simple spreadsheets that people have made up over the years that I found on, websites here and there that will function to fill in all of the blanks for a manual J calculation. That's what I usually use. The one I used was from a HVAC manufacturer's website that I had downloaded a number of years ago. And it's really just putting in all of the, wall, roof, basement, slab, and so on, insulation values, window values, areas, and things like that. And then the software takes it from there. So you just put in a bunch of inputs and it gives you the load calculation, whether it's heating or cooling based on the climate. So.
Brian, as I recall, you were editor at GBA when BOPT was launched. Is that correct? Is that the right timing?
I don't think it was. I think it was launched before I was editor at GBA. I know that a lot of GBA users like BOPT and use it, and there's a lot of discussion on the forum about it. So it's one place that people could go to learn a little bit more about that. I've never actually played around with any energy modeling software, but from speaking with lots of architects and builders over the years, I have a couple of sort of generalizations. At least one, and he mentions that learning the PHPP, passive house planning package software.
Yeah.
Seems extreme for his work. But I know lots of architects who wanted to be able to design or learn how to design a passive house and learned the software that no longer are designing passive houses for certification, but still use that software as their modeling software because they really like how detailed it is. So, and they can even just use it to question their assumptions on projects. So lots of people who have learned that find a whole lot of value in using it, whether they're interested in passive house certification or not. And I've heard that over and over and over again. Another thing is that he asks, should he learn to do manual J calculations? And I think there's a few paths to take in terms of, manual J is I think it's, from what I've seen in terms of outputs from different manual J programs, it can be useful beyond just modeling the heating and cooling loads in your house, or at least sizing the equipment, because it does give you it gives you heat loss and heat gain calculations for rooms around the house. And so you can actually, determine whether, you have You want to minimize glazing in a space because of the heat gain that you're getting in that space. Maybe you have lots of windows, and you can sort of see on this chart that there's what might be considered excessive heat gain because of those windows or their orientation. So you can actually use Manual J to help with some of your some of your envelope details, maybe even design a little bit. It can be helpful in that way. So whether he learns to use it or whether he works with an HVAC contractor who uses it legitimately, or what I did on this house was to use just sort of a third party engineer to do Manual J calculations for me. It wasn't that this engineer was in the Midwest, so it wasn't someone who was going to be working on the project. And one of the things that he told me right away was the most important thing with any energy modeling are the inputs. You need really good inputs, and then you need to build the house that way. So and the inputs aren't excessive for Manual J, like Mike said. It's beyond envelope and orientation. There's local weather conditions, and I'm sure some of the programs maybe even have all that loaded in them. So you really just need the house's location, but elevation and geography do matter in terms of those calculations. So really good inputs will give you really precise outputs, and then if you build the house like that, you can trust the energy models.
And that's not what it's all about, right? Is you have to have a plan and then stick to it. And if you deviate in the build, the what you planned is less valuable. And I've heard of folks getting in trouble because they tried to save money, and then all of a sudden it didn't work.
Right. If you have triple pane windows in the energy model, and then when you go to order them, you realize how expensive they are, and now all of a sudden you're ordering a double pane window with a much higher U factor, then all of a sudden your model's way off.
More commonly, I've heard the opposite is that people plan a system, and then installers go their own way and put something that deviates from what was agreed upon, and just because of their own bias or experience.
Yeah. I think you can learn a lot, though. It's very instructive. And over the years, we've had some articles on GBA where people have really kind of walked through some of what they've learned from energy modeling. And those have always been really instructive models to me, or instructive articles to me. And, though I was learning the results of their energy modeling and learning about buildings in that way, they found these results because they used some energy modeling software.
It's a fascinating subject. When you hear about houses that have humidity problems or comfort problems or cupping floors or ceilings that are tongue and groove wood material, like this is all preventable if everything is built to plan and agreed upon ahead of time.
I heard an interesting. I didn't hear it. I got a part of an article. I'm doing an article with about 7 different authors on common building science mistakes, and one of those authors was Emily Mottram, and who you may know from the Pretty Good House and from a Taunton, a very very in-depth Taunton course on essentially designing a pretty good house called the High Performance Homebuilding Accelerator, I think, and Emily wrote about oversized mechanicals as a mistake, and one of her term she wrote HVAC plus D. That's how she wrote out HVAC in her piece, and it took me a minute. I thought as soon as I read it, I thought, okay, here's my first question for Emily. What's HVAC plus D? And by the time I read a little further, it struck me, okay, it's dehumidification. But she has been convinced that if we're going to group HVAC all together, we should also be including dehumidification in that equation and make sure that we're properly considering it in the design of mechanicals.
With our tight, energy efficient homes, that it's increasingly a problem, and it surprises me to hear it's a problem even in Maine, where Emily works. Yeah,
I think we have 2 factors that are changing that, and Nikki Kruger from
Santa Fe.
Santa Fe, yeah,
Yeah.
dehumidification. She gave a presentation a few years ago where she just sort of showed shifting climate zones due to changing weather, and how much more of the country is needing to consider dehumidification on the regular. And then Patrick, as you pointed out too, tight building envelope changes things.
We should plug the after show before we move on to our final question. And this comes from a conversation that you brought up at a staff meeting, Brian, which is like, do you need expensive kit to build a high performance home? And I think it's a very thought provoking discussion. What made you interested in this, Brian?
I don't know. I say a lot of things at staff meetings. I think anyone who's been on Fine Homebuilding staff over the past 20 years would acknowledge that I tend to be the pest in those meetings. I guess just, we were talking about affordability and in homes, of construction projects, and wondering what Fine Homebuilding's role was in addressing affordability. And, my sort of thinking about that at the moment was, our role is to empower people to make decisions that will affect the affordability of their project, right? So give them tools to make design decisions or material or purchasing decisions to save money if that's what they want to do, and that it's less about like how expensive their home is or what the right square footage, cost per square foot price for a house should be, as if they are looking to save some money, what are some tools to do it? And I think that was sort of the genesis, that conversation, which Rob Yeaget had brought into the staff meeting, was sort of the genesis of this question.
Well, it's a good question. We see all kinds of expensive things in the homes that we cover, right? And I guess you have to ask: is it necessary? Does it help? Does it make it easier? I think it's case and product specific, right? Do you have thoughts on this, Mike? Has stuff gotten more complicated in the time you've been in the business?
Stuff, or you mean the materials?
Yeah, the materials, the parts to build a house.
Yeah, it's gotten more complicated, but I think to Brian's point or the question, it's like, yeah, you can go with these new marquee products that keep getting put on the market, or what are the alternatives that might perform at close to the same level of these marquee products that are name brand and heavily marketed, but are much more affordable. And I think there are a lot. And I've always looked in the homes that I've built let me step back a second. Value engineering. Value engineering can be partly done with design. And value engineering is where you look at a set of plans and you go, okay, where can we cut corners without damaging the building? And when I say corners, I'm talking dollars and cents corners, not corners structurally or environmentally inside. So
eliminating corners, though, isn't a good way to lower costs, I would point out.
Yeah. So, yeah, I've always looked towards, seeing where we can make savings for the clients.
It's a part of every build, right? Because things are always more expensive than anyone expects, I'm sure. Mm-hmm. You had another question come into you at the Touch a Trade event, Mike, in Kent, Connecticut a few weeks ago. Yep. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah, so we had we had over almost 500 people attend the Touch a Trade event, and several people came to the event just because they were thinking this is such a great idea, engaging young people as young as possible and giving them a hands-on experience touching tools, basically, is what it comes down to, and then talking to people who are professionals in the trade, and they wanted to see what they could do locally. So some of the questions that came up from a couple of discussions I had were, how can I start an event like Touch a Trade in my area? What's involved in putting one together? Are there other ways to help introduce and generate interest in construction trades and skills and architecture design to young people? How can we introduce young people to these in ways other than having these large events like we staged in Connecticut a few weeks ago, where we had how many, like 30 plus, 40 plus presenters, activities for the young people to engage with. Some people, it might be out of scale to do that for somebody who just wants, low budget. They don't want to try to build a whole big team like you work with, Patrick, to put Touch a Trade together. So, so I have some ideas there, and I'm sure you, Patrick, as well do. So, do you want to give a little background to what it takes to put on a Touch a Trade event, and the amount of planning and resources from a volunteer level go into that?
I'll try and keep it brief. It's a complicated question, right? And planning an event of this size that could have conceivably, we were expecting with good weather, 1,000 plus people to attend the most recent event. So that's a big event, and it takes someone who's skilled at event planning to put all the pieces together so they all are in place before it happens. More fundamentally, I would say you need three things: a venue, presenters, and attendees. And that sounds simple, but if you have presenters and some marketing to get people there, it all makes sense. And the presenters we've observed are somewhat self-selecting, because folks who are into the trades are going to want to do this. Folks who are not are going to stay home. So that's comparatively easy to screen people who are truly interested in helping and those that are giving it lip service. And as far as attendees, we had great outreach from folks who do homeschooling, some of the schools in the area, scouting, 4-H, and publicizing the event through guidance counselors seemed to have some success too. So I think the worst thing that could possibly happen is you have a bunch of people who are trying to help and then no one shows. So, if you get the attendees there, then it's hard to fail. And I tell people when I talk about this, when we started talking about this a couple years ago, Mason put me on the spot on a podcast episode somewhat and said, I said, well, that sounds like a great idea. I'd like to help. And he took me to heart. And it's been so enjoyable. And that's the point I was getting to, is we all thought this was a good idea. And I got tired of hearing people say that this was a problem and without a solution. And it's real easy to point your fingers at problems, but it's much harder to do something about them. So I decided it was worth helping. And it's way more fun than I could have ever imagined. Yes, it would seem valuable, but I can tell you the sheer joy, and I would guess you could speak to this, Mike, too, was totally unexpected. It was just so much fun. And both the people who put it on and the attendees, I think, had a way better time than they could have ever imagined.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we got a lot of the people who came this year had not been the previous year, and they were all just, a couple of the parents were like, were just gushing about how much this is needed, and also how much fun their kids were having, because we were where I was sort of about maybe halfway to 2/3 of the way through the circuit, and by that point they'd already experienced a bunch of things, and the parents could see their kids' eyes just lighting up, trying these different things. But it is a big event, and for somebody who thinks it's a good idea, would like to get involved and do something locally, starting small it would be where I would always recommend. Get your feet wet, especially if you're a contractor or a parent of a young child, and you want to get them involved, or if you're a contractor and you want to get involved in the community. I've done it for years in a bunch of different ways, and I'm just going to rattle off a quick list. And depending on what your network involvement is in your community, some of these might be places you'll say, yeah, this is where I have a connection that I can just investigate. So, of course, it's going to be schools. And now the age groups, what we've targeted, or what was targeted with Touch a Trade, is the middle school age, which is going to be running in that like 10 to 13 years old group, because it's going to be the idea is to try to involve young people before they get to high school, where they all kind of get tracked. So connecting with teachers, connecting with administration at schools. Patrick, you mentioned 4-H groups that you guys did outreach to. 4-H groups, if they're around your community, those are also great groups. They're mostly focused on farming, but I'm sure they would encourage trades as well, because anybody knows who's done any farming, you got to be a jack of all trades in order to do that. Church-based youth groups are another place. Boys and girls clubs, scouting, you mentioned those, Patrick. And then if there's any local farms or CSAs or a local, like a farmer's market, those kind of places where people would go periodically throughout the year. They might be good places where kids are already engaged when they start seeing farm animals or produce being grown in farms. If you connect with, if those organizations do events, then you could be there with a small little presentation area or activity area where it's a little bit different than what else is going on around there, and that could attract attention, and you can grow it from one station to 2 or 3, and they kind of are symbiotic in a way. So
We
there's just
found
a few ideas.
libraries are good partners in this, because they often want to have enrichment activities for after school, and these are a good opportunity to get a small group of folks exposed to trade work. We've had plumbing and carpentry on 2 different occasions in the area, and that was cool. Thoughts on this, Brian? Would you have attended one of these? Do you think Sam would have?
Well, I don't know if I definitely would have brought Sam, and he probably would have had fun. And at that age, Sam was very hands-on. He was, even though he's a kid who never really thought about a career in the trades, he used to work as a blacksmith or apprentice as a blacksmith as sort of a hobby. So I'm sure he would have had a great time there. And I look forward to getting to next year's event. I didn't get there this year because of some things that were happening in my personal life, but I look forward to being there and just hearing your enthusiasm, both of you, Patrick and Mike, on the show about it over the weeks. I'm excited to check it out for myself. And I think, it is I like the fact that it's the industry stepping up to do something that is maybe missing in other parts of, our society and kids' lives right now. So that little bit of introduction might go a long way.
One of the cool things that was also revealed in doing this a couple times now is that tradespeople know what's cool about their job. If you and I, Brian, were trying to write some curriculum for them to do a presentation to young folks on what's cool about being a carpenter, or a plumber, or a drywall, or tile setter, or an arborist, or a trades, textile work, whatever it is, we couldn't do as good a job. And that's part of the magic, too.
And one last thought on that from me anyway. A friend of mine is connected with our local schools, and he's an engineer. And the guidance counselors approached him about mentoring students, because there are a lot of education things that, well, the schools are focused on what they do, and they don't expose students to things outside of the regular curriculum. And there was a particular couple of students that really wanted to learn more about the engineering field. So he started mentoring these. They were I think they were in junior high school or middle school. And so he brought them around to some of the construction job sites, and then walked them through different calculations on what he had to do to figure out how to size a bridge abutments and, crazy things like that. And the kids just ate it up. And it was all, pencil and paper work and just walking a job site. But you can imagine the same kind of thing happening where you might want to just mentor somebody young. And if there is a spark in a young person's mind that they want to learn about, say, cabinet making, and you find out from the school by talking to the school guidance counselors that there might be some of these students with those interests in a trade that you do, then you might just meet with them a few times throughout the year and show them what you do and how you do it. And who knows, you might be seating a new employee in a few years. So it could come back around to help you out in the long run too.
And it's cool work, and I don't know how you know about it until you try it. And I think that's the best we can do, is expose to as many people as we can to the potential joys of loving your job. And that's perhaps the greatest gift. Well, thanks, guys. It's been a good show.
Yeah.
Well, thank you all for listening. I hope you'll stay tuned for our members-only after show. We'll be talking about building a performance house with mainstream building materials. It should be a good show, and if you are an all-access member, thank you very much for your support. If you're not, I hope you'll consider it. Holiday gift giving is upon us, so I might point out that Fine Homebuilding products or all-access membership make a tremendous gift. Unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks to Mike, Brian, and Jeff for joining us, and thanks to all of you for listening. Please remember to send us your comments, questions, and suggestions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. And please like, comment, or review us however you're listening. It helps other folks find our podcast. Stay safe, everybody. Keep craft alive. Happy building. Thanks for listening.